was stammering and stuttering a little bit this morning at breakfast too, trying to tell Matt Meadows a story. I just couldn't get the words out. I think there's something going on. I don't know. Donna was trying to tell me a joke. She said, "What's the difference between Kermit the Frog and what's he got in common?" And she started stammering. I was afraid she was going to lean up and sniff me. I thought Joe Biden was sitting down there. Ezekiel chapter number 22. Ezekiel chapter number 22. Time to get spiritual and end up talking politics and get fired. Ezekiel chapter number 22. We'll read verse number 29. I don't know if many of you all know my father's testimony. I think I've told mine many times, but my dad's testimony is one that it's one I'm very thankful for. My dad he grew up and he was raised in the home of an alcoholic. My grandfather, Howard Droddy Jr., he always had a Jack Coke in his hand, didn't have a whole lot good to say, never really left his recliner. I don't know much about the man. He died when I was a baby. Alcoholism got him. Thus, Lord, he got saved before he died, but my father grew up in that home. That's what he knew. That's the way he was raised. He had his first drink of liquor whenever he was just a small child. Him and his dad were out in the field and they were picking potatoes. It was hot that day and my dad was whining and complaining, saying, "Dad, I want something to drink." My grandfather said, "Don't tell your mother," and there he handed him a Jack Coke just as a small child, and there my dad had his first taste of liquor. He was an unsaved man until he got to be 31 years old. Somewhere along the line, my dad met my mom, and he fell in love with my mother, still unsaved at the time. Married her, and he had my sister, and then he had me, and they ended up getting in church. And my dad, at some point, realized that he wanted something different for me. He wanted something different for my sister. And he wanted something different for my mother than what he grew up with, than the way that his mother had to deal with the way that he grew up. I was once talking to my grandma about my grandfather. After he got saved, he quit drinking. One day, after he'd been sober for a couple of years, her name's Carol, he said, "Carol, I think I'm going to start drinking again." He said, "Go on ahead, and when you die, I won't shed a tear." And she looked me in the eyes, telling me this story, and she said, "Go ahead, I won't shed a tear." And she said, "And I didn't." And I believed her. That was what that living situation, that alcohol, that living in sin, that's the way that my dad grew up. But at some point, he looked, and I want to read this before I say this. Ezekiel chapter number 22, verse number 29. "The people of the land have used oppression and exercised robbery, and have vexed the poor and the needy. Yea, they have oppressed the stranger wrongfully." And this is where I'll draw my sermon from this evening. "And I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. Therefore I have poured out my indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. Their own way I have recompensed upon their heads, saith the Lord God." He says, stand in the gap before me. And this, what's going on here is Ezekiel the prophet is telling them what God has told him. And God has told Ezekiel, "I looked for a man to stand in the gap. Somebody to make up the hedge, someone to stand there to keep the enemy out, and I could not find one." And just what I'm thankful for is this. At some point, Johnny Droddy decided he wanted to stand in the gap for my family. And I'm so thankful for that. I look on social media and I see some of the young men I grew up with when I was very little in the town where I'm from. And I see that they didn't grow up in church. I see the high school that I would have gone to had my dad not stood in the gap. I see the people that they hang out with, the activities that they're involved in because their fathers didn't stand in the gap for them. And I'm thankful this evening that someone stood in the gap for me. We'll leave Ezekiel chapter 22. I don't usually skip around as much as I do, but we'll be all over the place. And this evening I want to preach on this thought. The man in the gap. My father, he stood in the gap for me, but I want to look at 4 different things about the man that stands in the gap. Go with me, we'll go firstly to 1 Kings chapter number 18. All 4 of the places that we'll go this evening are places that I've preached on here. Places that I've preached on, men that I have taught about, and these places in the Bible, though they're near and dear to my heart, though you all have heard me preach on these before, I just want to stop for a moment at each one of these, and I want to see what we can't do to apply these to our own lives. 1 Kings chapter number 18. I want to talk about the man Elijah. Elijah was the prophet here in this, and he lives in the nation, and there's nothing but wickedness. The king is married to a woman, and her name is one that we use as slander. If somebody was to call your wife Jezebel, you would fight him. But here is Elijah. This is the situation that he's in. The nation is living in sin, and because of that, the Lord has had Elijah pray a drought upon them. But in 1 Kings 18, verse number 37 through 39, Elijah lays down a challenge before all of these wicked and pagan prophets. He lays down this challenge. He says, you take you a calf, you take you a cow, I'll take a cow, and we'll lay them out as sacrifices. And I want you to pray from your God that you can bring down fire from heaven to consume that sacrifice. They run around and they chant and they cut themselves, and they're out there all day in the sun, and there is no fire that falls from a God that does not exist. Elijah comes out and he prays, and let's read the latter end of his prayer, verse number 37, chapter number 18. This is Elijah's words here. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord God, that thou hast turned their heart back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell to consume the burnt sacrifice, and the wood and the stones and the dust licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And what I want to point out here this evening, as we look at Elijah, is that he is just a man. He's just like me. He's just like Bob. He's just like Jay. He's like any of us that are in here. He's flesh and blood. He's nothing special. But because Elijah here, he decides for his nation, for his people, for the people he has been charged and called to minister to, for these people whom he loves, he wants to see them come back to the Lord. He is willing to stand in front of hundreds of prophets from another God. A king who does not like him. The king's wife who wants to see him dead. And he says to himself, he says to the Lord, I'm willing to stand in that gap. There he stands in the gap boldly, and God brings the victory. And because of that, the nation sees, and they say, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And the first thing I see when I look at the man in the gap is I see the power of the man in the gap. It's nothing that we can bring upon ourselves. It's nothing of our own heart, our own body. Growing up, and I don't know if any of y'all would disagree with this or not. Growing up, my dad always, as long as I can remember, he always would carry a gun with him. Right? It would be in his waistband. He had himself a concealed carry permit. He was very careful with it. Growing up, he was always really strict about gun safety. You don't point a gun at something that you don't intend to destroy. You treat every gun as though it is a loaded gun. And my dad taught me how to properly handle a gun so that nobody gets hurt. Now, growing up, we went on lots of trips. Whether it was a family trip, we'd be road tripping, or whether it was a church trip where we're going to a missions conference, we're going to a youth conference, a church camp. That gun went where my dad went. He probably broke some laws by taking it across state lines. I don't know. But nonetheless, he wanted to keep that thing on him so that he could protect his family. But if it wasn't on his waistband, let's say he was driving all day, he didn't want that thing on his waistband, or he was going somewhere he wasn't allowed to take the gun into this building, he would take that gun, he would put it in his backpack. Okay? Many times through my life, a situation would arise where I needed to carry that backpack. Maybe we're unloading the car from the luggage. We're loading the car for the luggage. Maybe my dad's tired from carrying his backpack all day and I want to take it off of him. But before he would ever hand me that pack, he would always say the same thing. He would look at me and he would say, be careful, the backpack is loaded. It's not to say that the backpack has any power, does it? Right? It's just a backpack. It's just a sack that we bought at Walmart and he carried it around for years. But it's what's inside of that backpack. He would say, be careful, it's loaded. And what that told me was that inside was something with some more power. Inside was a Glock 43 with one in a chamber, a full magazine, and I was not to point that gun at anybody. I was to leave it in the bag. I was to not shake that bag around. I wasn't to drop it. I wasn't to fling it onto my shoulder. I surely wasn't going to hand that backpack to somebody that didn't know there was a gun in there. And the point that I want to make this evening is the power that you could say was in that backpack. To say that backpack's loaded, it didn't come from the pack of what was inside it. I can almost imagine as the devil sends out his minions to tempt us, to torment us. to come after us with all of the fiery darts, as the Bible calls it. I can almost picture, maybe he doesn't say this, but I can almost picture the devil saying to his minions as he sends them out, be careful with that one. There's something on the inside that's different. Yeah. That one's got something inside that the others don't have. It's not just a backpack. It's a backpack with a handgun in it. That's not just a person. That's not just a father. That's not just a son. That's not just an employee. That is a child of God. There's something living inside that gives it more power. I see that the man that stands in the gap, the man who lives in the gap, willing to stand up for the Lord, to protect those that he loves, has power. Go with me. We'll go to Job chapter number 1. Job chapter number 1. Like I said, we'll go to multiple places this evening. Just bear with me. I'll preach this as fast as y'all can listen. Job chapter number 1. I see that the man that stands in the gap has power from God, but I see that the man that stands in the gap also has patience. Job chapter number 1, verse number 21, we find Job here. He just has found out that he's lost everything. All he's got left is his wife. He still has his health, but he'll soon lose that. He has had someone come and tell him he's lost all of his livestock. He has someone that they come and tell him that his children, they were all together and they were all celebrating. The house fell down and all of his children are dead. And here he is in his despair. Verse number 20 of Job chapter number 1, he says, Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. He said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. The people of this church especially that I see are embattled. Fighting the flesh especially. So many are sick and hurting. So many, how many women in the last 3 years since I've been here, we've had probably nearly 10 women, just breast cancer alone and no other cancers. And that is staggering. In the last year alone, 4 ladies have been widowed, and so many mothers and fathers have passed. So many people are struggling with sicknesses. I can't tell you the last time I saw John and Sue Parsons. Sue, I believe, is still battling that cancer. I've got a pretty good life. I've got an easy life. It's easy for me not to get discouraged. I don't need a whole lot of patience to live the life that I'm living, but I know that so many of you in here, at times, you must be thinking to yourself, what is the Lord doing? How is He going to use this? Why has He brought this upon me? I feel like I'm doing pretty good. I'm in church. I'm reading my Bible. I witness to people. Why is He bringing the sickness on me? Why is He bringing the hurt on me? And here's Job, a man that had no fault, a man that made no mistakes that we know of here, a man that loved the Lord, but here he is. He's lost his children. He's lost his possessions. He's about to lose his health, but what does he have to say? He says, Naked came I out of my mother's womb. Naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, Job was a man that stood in the gap for his family. One of the first places we find Job is that he is praying for his children. They're away from the Lord, and he is standing in the gap for them. He's pleading their case on behalf of his children. He's pleading to the Father God above to have mercy on them and to watch over them. As a man that stands in the gap, and what do I see that he has here? He has patience with the Lord. I see that the man that stands in the gap has power. I see that he has patience. We'll spend the rest of the evening in 2 Samuel. Go to chapter number 21. 2 Samuel, chapter number 21. My dog, I wish it was my dog. My boss lives on a farm, right? His name's Matt, and they've got lots of animals. They've got horses. His brother has horses. They're on the property next to it. But he himself, he's got donkeys, he's got cattle, he's got more chickens than I can even count. I try to count them, but they're everywhere. They lay eggs everywhere. They lay eggs up in the square baler, and I've got to crawl up into it and get them. It's like a scene out of a Final Destination movie. I feel like it's probably on Will Die. But he's got animals everywhere. There's a barn cat. There's an alpaca. There's even some ducks. But the animals that I tend to find the most interesting in their behavior is his dogs. He's got 5 of them, right? Inside the house, that stays in with his wife and his daughter, and they'll run around in the backyard where there's a fence, is 2 wiener dogs. One is a short-haired wiener dog named Trucker. Then there is a long-haired wiener dog named Willow, a corgi named Gatsby. They got a thing for dogs with short legs, I think. And one big black German shepherd named Waylon. Waylon is a fierce-looking dog, right? Waylon's got these white, pearly teeth. Man, he's a big dog. He's, and all 4 of these dogs, they like to bark. They bark a lot. I love them. I'm not trying to say anything bad about the dogs. I love all 4 of these dogs, especially the corgi. Corgi likes me. But all 4 of these dogs will bark and bark and bark, especially that big German shepherd, right? Now, as fierce as he looks as he's running around inside of the fence, I know this from experience. As that dog is barking at me, I can open that gate, step inside, and start stepping towards that dog, and he will move the other way. If I lunge towards him, he'll scurry back, and he's trying to get to the back porch. He's trying to get up to that door, and he wants my boss's wife to let him inside, and he doesn't want me to get him, right? And that dog I have found, maybe if you corner him, maybe if you try to go after the owner, I don't know, maybe he would fight you. But what I found is that the dog is all bark, right? That's the 4 dogs that like to bark, like to carry on, like to act fierce. Maybe one of the wiener dogs will nip at your ankle. But there's one dog that lives outside of the fence. This dog lives out on the front porch. Good dog. The kind of dog you can leave outside and he won't run off. He stays out on his own volition and he does what he wants and he stays on my boss's land and his name is Butter, right? Butter's he's a golden lab. He's a sweet dog. Love him to death. Butter, he's not like that. He doesn't just bark at everybody, You always know where my boss's wife is. She has a shop where she prints t-shirts and she does work for her business. And Butter will always be either laying in front of the door of that if she's inside of there. Or if his wife is in the house, Butter will be over there in front of the door at the house. He's always outside of the door where she is. He won't come inside. You open the door up, you look inside, and he's just outside. He's just there to watch the door. Now Butter, though he's not one that'll really bark a whole lot, whenever he sees a car coming up the driveway, he sees somebody walking up the driveway that he does not know, Butter he'll jack that fur up on his back. He'll get really angry, he'll get down low. He doesn't bark a whole lot, he might bark a little bit, but what his thought is, and this is because Butter is a good dog, is, I don't know that person. I truly believe Butter's more bite than he is bark. I wouldn't want to be on that dog's bad side. He's not as big and as tough and as scary looking as the German Shepherd, but that dog is got some bite to it. Whenever somebody comes up that would want to do harm, Butter will get after them. And sometimes you got to go and grab Butter because he doesn't know that person. He doesn't trust that person. Let's look at a young man. I've preached on this young man before. 2 Samuel 21, verse 15. 2 Samuel 21, verse number 15. They came and besieged him, and Abel of... I don't think I'm in the right place. Hang on one second. I got to find it in my phone. I wrote down the wrong place. Let's see here. Bear with me. Okay, 2 Samuel 21. No, I'm in chapter 20. 2 Samuel 21, verse number 15. I was right the first time, I was just looking in the wrong place. Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel. David went down and his servants with him and fought against the Philistines, and David waxed faint. I want you to keep in mind that David is an old man at this point. And Ishbi-benob, which was of the sons of the giant being Goliath, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, succored him. Abishai is David's nephew. And smote the Philistine and killed him. What I see here is David is now an old man, but he still wants to go to battle. So he goes and he's fighting. He's out there under the hot sun, and he says, and he waxed faint. And along comes the son of a man that we know good and well David killed with a sling and a stone. His name is Ishbi-Benob. He is a giant. The giant comes along and he wants to slay David. But here in verse number 17, David's nephew, a man by the name of Abishai, comes along, and it doesn't go into great detail. It doesn't talk about him going and how he defeated him. It just says he succored him and smote the Philistine and killed him. Here I see a man that stood in the gap for somebody that was his idol. Growing up, could you imagine you are the nephew of David, King David? You grow up and your mother's brother is the man that killed Goliath with a sling and a stone. And here is this place now, he comes along and he sees the giant, the son of Goliath, here to kill his uncle David. And what does he do? He stands in the gap before him, despite how dangerous it looks. Despite how fierce that giant probably was. If that giant was anything like his dad, he was a big man. He was a trained man. He was a warrior his whole life. But here Abishai stands in the gap, and if I'm going to be looking at the points, I see the power, I see the patience, and I see the protection of the man who stands in the gap. Just like faithful old butter and a dog. The man that's in the gap wants to protect his family. Now you yourself, you can't fight off the devil. You don't have the power to fight him. He's more ancient than you are. He's smarter than you are. He's more powerful than you are. But what do we know to do to protect those that we love? Run to the Lord. Amen. Here Abishai gets to fight the Philistine and to kill him with his own bare hands. But for us, if we want to protect those that we love, we want to stand in the gap for those that we love. My father decided to stand in the gap for me and for my family. He ran to the Lord. I see the power of the man in the gap, the patience of the man in the gap, protection. Now turn with me a few pages over. Go to 2 Samuel chapter number 23. I want to look at a man by the name of Eleazar. 2 Samuel 23 and verse number 8. Now I know that maybe some of the ladies are sitting here and you're thinking to yourself, this is all about men. I don't know how this applies to me. Do I not need to stand in the gap? Though this is another man that we're going to talk about here, I want to be very clear that this is for everyone. Donna, I know that there's some big victory being won in your family right now. You had a grandson get saved a couple weeks ago. He's bringing his girlfriend to church with him. You had a great-grandson get saved this morning because his grandmother got things right with the Lord. Maybe she was saved before, maybe she wasn't, but she knows now. And she wants to get him in church. She wants to get things right. And your sons, they've been in church more than I've ever seen. And it's wonderful to see it all going on. There's victories being won. And you know why I think it is? I believe it's because you stood in the gap for your family. At times, though, you think to yourself, am I the only one praying for these people? Am I the only one telling these people they need to be in church? They need to get saved. It only takes one. Verse number 8 of chapter number 23. These be the names of the mighty men whom David had. The Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains, the name was Adonai the Eznite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. Now pay attention here to this man Eleazar. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo the Ahite, one of 3 mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines that were there gathered together to battle. And the men of Israel were gone away. He, being Eleazar, arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary. And his hand clave under the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day. And the people returned after him only to spoil. Here we find this man Eleazar. He is in the battle. He is named as one of David's mighty men. He is the best of the best. But here he's in battle, he is fighting, he's swinging his sword, he's stabbing, he's blocking attacks, and he's battling other men who want to kill him. And he wants to kill them. And all of his allies, they retreat. That's what we're told. They back off. But it says that Eleazar fought. Not only do we find that the battle was won, even though everyone else retreated, which tells me that he fought the battle by himself and won it, but he fought so long that after it was done, he could not let go of his sword. And at times in this life, both for the men and the women, and even the children in here, if ever you're getting discouraged and you think to yourself, am I the only one standing in the gap for those that I love? I've seen children come to church on a church bus, get saved by the grace of God, and then bring their whole family to church. And that whole family gets saved, and it's because that child wants to stand in the gap, and it only takes one. The way that things are worded in Ezekiel chapter number 22, the way that it's worded, it almost seems as though the Lord is going to make the entire wall. He just needs one person to participate, to fill in the gap. But he could not find one. And it only took one person to stand in the gap to defeat all of these Philistines by the power of God. We see the power, the patience, protection, and the perseverance of the man in the gap. Lastly, I want to look at the purpose of the man in the gap. There was somebody that stood in the gap that wasn't my earthly father anyway. We celebrate a day today where he rose from the grave. While he was up on the cross, taking a punishment for a sin that he did not commit, he was up there dying and suffering and putting on my sin and your sin. And everything we've ever done, every wicked place we've been, he was the one that took that, and Jesus Christ stood in the gap for you and for me. If you don't know it, you need to get it right. All of these men that stood in the gap for those that they loved and those they wanted to protect, they were only able to complete their mission, to do what was right, to do the thing that they had set their heart and their mind to. They were only able to get it done by God's power. All that patience that Job had with all the situations he was going through. I can picture him there as he's scraping the boils. You know the song that they sing, the group from Liberty? What did you end up naming it? The Voices of Liberty? The Sounds of Liberty. And they sing that song that quotes that verse. The Lord gave, He taketh away. And the reason I love that song so much is because when they sing it, I can picture Job there singing the song himself. I mean, I know he probably wasn't singing the song himself, but it's his words that they're singing. And I can see him, maybe he goes and he says this again as he's scraping the boils off of him with the potsherds, and he's saying, Lord give, and He taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that patience that he gets is only from God. And the strength that Eleazar has to fight off all these Philistines by himself, only from God. All these things only possible with the Lord. But I believe all of us have somebody that we want to stand in the gap for. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for letting me preach this evening. I'm not much. I'm just a sinful ball of clay, Lord. I'm just earth, the life breathed into it, and I'm only capable of the things that you allow me to do. And Father, I pray that what I've preached this evening is every word as you wanted me to say. I haven't said anything of my own heart, my own mind. I only want to lift you up. Father, if there's anyone in here that is unsaved, please let them get it right before we leave this evening. In precious name we pray.